Hello, this is Just Listen, hosted by George. Today is March 25th, 2024. I want to talk about the U.S. government policy on diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, and the reaction from the states on this policy. It's important to get a little background on this. So, the DEI was a result of an executive order from President Biden in 2021, and it set off a firestorm not only in the federal government but in the private sector as well. The gist of it is from my previous podcast where I talked about this is who's to blame for colleges not admitting black people and other groups. Who's responsible for the high crime in the country? Who's responsible for people having the need to be on welfare that are in the black community and the other minority groups? And I address that. What I want to focus on is the reaction from the states currently. And I want to start with Utah. If you listen to the sound bites and the narrative coming from the networks, they are framing all of the problems on what I just talked about. And the result of that was this executive order. And after that executive order, you might not be aware of that the professionals in that field, meaning diversity, equity, and inclusion, came up with a definition. And their definition was aimed at correcting inequities within an organization, that means the private sector, which includes implementing and correcting discriminatory hiring practice, addressing gender and racial pay inequities, anti-bias training, and more. Now, that was part of it, but with that executive order, some legislatures in some of these states came up with rules and they got funding for it, and the reaction in some of these states is appropriate, in my opinion, based on what was come up with the interpretation of this executive order on DEI. So back to Utah. So Utah says that the state will not pay for hiring at universities and state government personnel to man these offices. That's all that they said, was that you weren't going to use taxpayer dollars to pay for this. And specifically what was said, universities and government, meaning the state government, would not be allowed to have offices dedicated to promoting diversity. They also could not require employees to submit statements of commitment to DEI. Did you guys know that? That in this state, employees had to sign a statement of committing to DEI. Let's look at the next one. Let's look at Florida. Now in Florida, this got a lot of coverage by the networks. And again, I'm not attacking the networks. What really they need to do is make sure that they're getting out the full details. So the governor signed into law something called the Stop Woke Act that placed strict limitations on the topics Florida employers can discuss at diversity, equity, and inclusion trainings and seminars. That's all that was. It wasn't anything else directed at any group of people, denying them anything. It's only about the training. Why did they feel the need to put this into law? Well, let me tell you why. The Act prohibits employers with 15 or more employees from requiring an employee to participate in any form of training that espouses, promotes, advances, or compels such individual to believe the following concepts. And I'm not going to go through all of them, just 2 or 3 of them. First one. Members of one race, color, sex, or national origin are morally superior to members of another race, color, sex, or national origin. That's one of them. Second one, an individual by virtue of his or her race, color, sex, or national origin is inherently racist, sexist, or oppressive, whether they consciously or unconsciously know it. Third one, an individual's moral character or status is either privileged or oppressed is necessarily determined by his or her race, color, sex, or national origin. Do you understand why Florida didn't want this kind of training being taught to employees? Because it is specifically biased and really puts into mind that someone is really being oppressed in the country and they want every employee to know it. Let's look at the next one. The next one is Alabama. So they recently passed into law what they call the anti-DIA, and they received some backlash because they pretty much got some bad press on it. Here's what it says. It says any program, class, training, seminar, or other event where attendance is based on the individual's race, sex, gender identity, ethnicity, national origin, or sexual orientation, or that otherwise violates this act. This is directly being directed at universities where they're using state money or college money to have these seminars and pretty much trash one group of people and make assertions that they don't have any facts and data to support what they're talking about. The bill will also require public institutions of higher education to designate restrooms based on biological sex, a provision that will prevent transgender students from using the bathroom corresponding to their gender identity. And that's all that this law is doing. So I'm giving you 3 examples where the original law, or in this case, executive order, was outlining whose fault it was and why. And the state legislatures and some of these states came up with more rules, and mainly it seems to be in training policy and funding. And the mainstream medias never talked about that. They framed it like it was a pushback, and they made it racial. Like the legislatures were targeting minorities and pretty much wanting them to just be quiet about it. Now think about this. Especially if you look at Florida, somebody is blaming you for any problem they've ever had, and this group is saying no matter what they do, it's your fault. If they're committing crimes, it's because of discrimination, of how they were treated. If they don't want to go to college, then it's your fault. And it just goes on and on. We cannot address problems in the country with crime, people not getting hired in jobs, and say, well, it's because there's no diversity, equity, and inclusion. I was born in the 60s. I started school in 1970. And I got through high school. I went into the military. That was an opportunity. And I have always looked at the world that I can do anything that I want to do. Nothing that I've done has been luck. It's been hard work. And it just feels like the last 20 years that some people, these activists, are making excuses for what's happening in the country with crime, what's happening in the country with college admission. For example, when I went to college, no one stopped me from going or put up any barriers. So it's hard for me to understand why we have pivoted to blaming someone else and not taking accountability for what people are doing, especially with crime and drug use. This diversity, equity, and inclusion separates people, and it points fingers at a group who really haven't had any power to affect things being bad for another group. And specifically, we seem to want to blame the majority for all of the problems of Black people, to be honest. And I don't understand why there is no accountability within the group of the Black community to talk about not having fathers in the home, how they are using the illegal guns, for example. And the most important thing is, how would you like it that every time someone is having a problem, you're blamed for it? And that is what's happening. And also, there's only pockets of issues in the country. And if you look at the other states, they're not having the issues that for some reason they want to promote these views and training. And if you look at Florida, wow, you're really blaming it on one group. What do you think? This is George. This is Just Listen. Let me know what you think.